Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another episode of Time Warp for you. This is a series where I go over things that have changed or removed from the game for one reason or another. As promised, I'm continuing on with my old attunement quests. Attuning, if you don't know, is basically a series of quests or objectives that you have to complete to gain entry to a certain dungeon or raid. This time, we're tackling the big one, and that's the Burning Crusade. So, get comfy, grab a drink and a snack because the attunement for this expansion was legendary. Over time, the attunement process was removed or otherwise nerfed. For this video, I want to go over the original state before the nerfs, so that means revered for the heroic keys and some other things as you'll see. The main goal of this will be to show you start to finish the attuning process for the Battle for Mount Hyjal raid, which is a time traveling raid located in the Caverns of Time. To zone inside, you simply walk through the portal, right? No, you're entering a world of pain, my friend. Back then, if you tried to simply walk in, you would have been given a message saying that you needed to attune for this raid. And how did you go about doing that? Well, stay a while and listen. Step 1 was obtaining the Vial of Eternity quest from the NPC in the Caverns of Time. This quest required you to get two things, Kael's Vial Remnant and Vash's Vial Remnant. You got these from Lady Vash, the final boss of the Serpent Shrine Cavern raid, and Kil'thas, the final boss of the Eye raid in the Tempest Keep. So, let's start with the Tempest Keep route first. The Eye is a 4-boss raid, and to even zone into that, you need to get attuned. But before you could get the quest to get attuned, you had to complete another lengthy quest chain called the Cipher of Damnation. This began with an NPC in the Shadowmoon Valley zone, and it was a whopping 25 quest long endeavor. Now, for the sake of keeping the length of the video down, I won't go too in depth here. Actually, you know what? I did this entire chain for this video, so you're gonna have to sit through it too. You start by talking to a shaman, who sends you to another shaman, who asks you to capture 8 earth and fire souls. You then return to the shaman, he sends you back to capture 5 water souls, return to the shaman, capture 10 air souls. He sends you to Oronok Tornheart to the north, who sends you on the worst quest in the game where you have to click a whistle to have a board dig up a tuber for you to pick up. But there are also other enemies killing the boars, so you have to continuously kill them to keep the boars alive. You take 40 minutes to get the 10 tubers, return to Oronok, who sends you back out to smash some eggs, return to him again, click through the dialogue and listen to his story, and grab 3 quests sending you to his sons scattered throughout the zone. Go to Gromtor to the west and kill Naga until you get a key to open a chest in the area that contains the Cipher of Damnation, but not every chest has a cipher. Actually, it's like a 1% drop rate, or at least it felt like it, and the keys also have a low drop rate, and it actually takes another 40 minutes. Eventually loot the cipher, return it to Oronok, go southwest to Artor, kill a nearby succubus, loot a key, return to Artor, kill demons and loot a bow. Return to Artor again, kill a giant eyeball tentacle demon thing, return to Artor again, bring the lockbox to Oronok, head south, talk to Borak, go west and loot a rotten Arakoa egg, go all the way to Shatrath and have a nice group puke session, return to Borak, place a trap at the end of the bridge, kill the courier, loot the missive, return to Borak, kill blood elves to the south and loot their armor, return to Borak to get a disguise, put on the disguise to get information from an NPC at the waypoint. Wait 10 minutes for him to spawn until you realize that the NPC is actually a little bit north of the waypoint, obviously. Get the information, return to Borak, head east, kill an elite, and return to Borak. Bring the third and final cipher to Oronok and head south to kill Sirik the Fire Lord and complete the quest. Whew. Okay, so in essence, it was a pretty big quest chain. There was even a follow-up to it years later in the Warlords of Draenor expansion where you actually got Oronok as a follower for your garrison, so you can send him on missions. Upon completing the chain, you'll get a letter from Khadgar telling you to meet with him in Adal and Shatrath. It has 3 trials for you, the Trials of Mercy, Strength, and Tenacity. The Trial of Mercy sends you to the Shattered Halls dungeon on Heroic mode, but to zone into the Shattered Halls, you need a key to unlock the gate outside. It's called the Shattered Halls key, and to get it, you have to complete a quest chain. What else? The start of the chain drops off of Smith Gorlunk in the Shadowmoon Valley. It's a key mold, and you have to bring it to Honor Hold if you're Alliance, or Thrallmar if you're Horde. And the smith there needs you to bring him back some materials to forge the key. 4 fell iron bars, 2 arcane dusts, and 4 motes of fire. But he doesn't actually forge the key for you, even though he's a Grand Master blacksmith. To do that, you have to gather a bunch of friends and kill a wandering Fell Reaver in the Hellfire Peninsula and use its fires to forge the key. So, now you can open the gate that leads to the dungeon. But wait, this trial is for Heroic mode. Heroic modes were special in the Burning Crusade because you had to get a special item. And I want you to guess what this special item is. Just take a shot in the dark on what this mystery item could possibly be. Alright, it's a key, okay? It's a key. Specifically for the Shattered Halls and all other Hellfire Citadel dungeons, and it's called the Flamerot key. Luckily, you can just straight up purchase this one, but unluckily, it requires revered reputation with a certain faction before you can buy it. This was later changed to honored because, come on, we don't want to be excessive or anything like that. That would be crazy. Initially, Revered was quite the task. It depended on the faction, but in general it took a decent amount of time to grind that out. But once you did, you could finally zone into the heroic Shattered Halls. There was a timed element to this dungeon where there would be an executioner at the end who would kill prisoners after a certain amount of time. For this quest, he had to clear the entire dungeon before he kills the prisoners. And heroic dungeons back then were pretty tough. Some would argue that a handful of them were even impossible without at least Karazhan gear. If you were successful though, that's the Trial of Mercy quest complete. Just 2 more to go. The next one is the Trial of Strength, which required you to kill the final boss of the Steam Vaults and the final boss of the Shadow Labyrinth, both on heroic mode. Since they are heroic, they of course require heroic keys. For the Steam Vaults, you needed the Reservoir key, which was initially revered with the Cenarian Expedition faction. And for the Shadow Labyrinth, you needed the Alkanite key, which needed revered with the Lower City reputation. The Shadow Labyrinth is a special case though because there was also a door blocking the entrance that needed another key. To get this, you need to kill the final boss of the Sethic Halls dungeon, Talon King Ikis. But once you got all of that out of the way and you killed those 2 final bosses, that was the Trial of Strength done. The next one on the list is the Trial of Tenacity, which required you to rescue Millhouse Manastorm from the final boss in the Arcatraz dungeon on heroic difficulty. To enter the Arcatraz, you needed 3 things: the Arcatraz key, the Warpforged key to enter on heroic mode, and a flying mount because the dungeon was floating in the Netherstorm, and initially, summons were disabled in this area, so it required a flying mount and training as well. The quest for the Arcatraz key was fairly lengthy, 11 quests long. Not as long as the Cypher, but still nothing to sneeze at. It started in the Netherstorm, and you had to kill a Dreadlord to loot a crystal, kill Ethereals and get 10 of their insignias, kill an enemy called the Warp Raider Nasad, recover 10 boxes of surveying equipment, use triangulation devices, and recover a crystal. The last part required you to run the Botanica and Mechanar dungeons to finally get both halves of the Arcatraz key. And then you of course needed the Warpforged key to zone into heroic mode. This required revered with the Shatar faction at first, and then honored later on, so lots of grinding. Once you complete that, you get one more follow-up called the Megtheridon Trial. This required not a heroic dungeon, but rather a raid called Megtheridon's Lair. This is a single boss raid, often compared to the Onyxia's Lair from Vanilla World of Warcraft. Luckily though, this raid didn't require any attuning, so you could zone right on in. The challenge was more inside the instance obviously, trying to take the boss down. But finally, once you completed that, you got the Tempest Keep key. It took 40 normal quests, 4 heroic dungeons, 1 raid, but we finally got it. And, with the exception of the door keys, every single raid member had to do it, so you're talking 25 plus times. But remember, our goal was to cover the attunement for Mount Hyjal, and the Tempest Keep was just a component of that. We do have another chain to cover, and that's the Sherpenshrine Cavern. To attune for this, you needed to grab a quest inside of the Slave Pen's heroic dungeon. Luckily, if you did the Tempest Keep part first, you should already have the heroic key for this place. You had to find an NPC captive in a cage, and he gave you a quest called the Cudgel of Kardesh. To complete that, you needed to loot an item off of Gruul the Dragonkiller, the second and final boss in the Gruul's Lair raid. And you also had to get an item off of Nightbane in the Karazhan raid. Gruul's Lair requires no attunement, and it's only a 2-boss raid, so it could have been worse. Karazhan, however, did require attunement, so let's go over that. The quest chain started right outside of the instance from the Archmage Altruis. He wants you to gather 10 ghostly essences in the surrounding area, and then head all the way north to the Dalaran Crater to Archmage Cedric. After that, you had to report to Khadgar in Chatrath City, and next you had to gather some key fragments. The first fragment was in the Shadow Labyrinth dungeon, which again required a key. You should have that by now though if you finished the eye attunement portion. The fragment was in a chest located near the final boss, Murmur, and luckily you only needed normal mode to get it. For the follow-up quest, you had to get 2 more fragments in 2 more dungeons, the second in the Steam Vault and the third in the Arcatraz, which once again required a key, which we went over earlier. And again, you could get these fragments in normal mode. This completed the key, but it needed just one more touch. You needed to have the last guardian, Medivh, empower it. But, seeing how he's now dead, the only way to do that would be to time travel. Luckily for you, you can find him in the opening of the Dark Portal dungeon in the Caverns of Time, otherwise known as the Black Morass, but unluckily for you, you simply can't zone in, it required attunement. To get attuned, you had to complete a quest chain that started in the Caverns of Time and required you to go through another dungeon there first, and that was the Escape from Durnhold. There were multiple stages of this quest inside of the instance that required you to escort Thrall to safety. And if you watched the previous time warp with the Marshal Windsor escort, you would know that this itself can be troublesome. If you're doing it with a group, you have to make sure that everyone is at the same step at all times, and if someone accepts the next part prematurely, you have to do it all over again for those who are still turning in the previous part. and this dungeon was rough because it was mainly an escort mission. You couldn't set the pace to make things go faster. There are lots of things that I miss from the game, and escort quests aren't one of them, I'll tell you what. But if you were successful, you could finally zone into the opening of the Dark Portal, and even though the quest says to simply talk to Medivh, you did have to clear the whole dungeon before you could. After that, you had to return to Khadgar, and you got your Karazhan key, and you could finally complete the Serpentine Cavern attunement. But wait, this quest requires you to kill Nightbane, which was an optional boss of Karazhan, and to summon him, you had to do another quest chain. So hold your horses, we're not done yet. To summon Nightbane, you had to first reach Honored with the Violet Hold, and then accept a quest from the Archmage Altruis outside of the instance. He sends you inside of Karazhan, and the hold chain requires you to kill a number of bosses to reach the correct rooms. The first part sent you to a room past the Curator boss, and for the next part you needed to loot Medivh's journal off of the Shade of Aran boss. The next part sent you to the actual summoning location of Nightbane called the Master's Terrace. After that, you had to head outside of the instance and loot a bone fragment, and then bring that to Area 52 in the Netherstorm, and then you're sent to 2 heroic dungeons, the Shattered Halls and the Sethic Halls. So, 2 keys for the Shattered Halls, and 1 for the Sethic Halls since they're on heroic. And, after that, you can finally summon Nightbane. Now all you have to do is kill him, and then return to the slave pens and turn in the quest. Congratulations, because you can now zone into the Serpentine Cavern. Finally, you can loot Lady Vash's Vial, and with that, you completed the Vials of Eternity quest. There's just one last step. You need Revered with the Keepers of Time faction, which was another rep grind. It was quite the journey, and you know what the best part is? Everyone had to do this to zone into the raid, which was a real difficulty. The raid itself was of course challenging, but coordinating 25 plus people to do all of this was a nightmare. Now, I should say that some of this stuff only one person needed. The keys that opened the gates outside of the dungeons, and the Nightbane summoning for example, just needed one person and everyone else could join in. But still, it was pretty nuts. But what if I were to tell you that this wasn't the endgame for attunement, but rather just another component for another attunement? So, let's move on to the final part, and that's the Black Temple. This was a pretty lengthy quest chain with a faction called the Ashtongue Deathsworn. It started and ended in the Shadowmoon Valley, requiring you to kill Ashton workers and collect 10 tablet fragments, kill a named called Orunu the Elder, kill 4 named enemies spread throughout the zone, and then you had to interrogate someone, kill a satyr, and then go through a hidden passage to speak to the leader of the Ashtongue, Akama. After chatting with him and his seer, you're sent to the outskirts of the Black Temple to kill some warlocks and an elite. This one generally required a full group to complete. After that, you're sent to Shattrath, and then another quest chain opens up. And this one is way tougher because it's all raiding content. The first part starts in the Serpentine Cavern raid, so as you know, lots of attunement required for that. You had to talk to an NPC there, and he only spawns once you kill the Fathom Lord Karathres, who is usually the 4th boss in the raid. He sends you back to Akama, who sends you to the Tempest Keep raid to kill the giant phoenix, Alar. And while doing so, you had to be wearing a disguise called the Ashtongue Cowl. The next part sent you to the raid we just went over, the Battle for Mount Hyjal. And you had to kill the first boss there, Rage Winterchill, and bring his phylactery back to Akama. You then returned to Shattrath, returned to the entrance of the Black Temple, and you finally got the Medallion of Karabor, which grants you entry to the Black Temple raid. And once again, every single raid member had to do this. And that concludes the attuning process for the Burning Crusade. As I said, a lot of this was nerfed. The Serpentine Cavern and the Eye raids had their attunement removed on June 19th of 2007, just about a month after Black Temple's release. And the Karazhan, Hyjal, and Black Temple attunements were no longer required in a March of 2008 patch. Ever since then, Blizzard has kind of abandoned the attunement idea, at least ones as complex as what we had in BC. They did exist after the fact, but it was really just a few quests for the most part, and you didn't need a chart to make sense of it. Speaking of which, as confusing as this is, I hope I got it all right for the most part. I mean, it has been 10 years, so give me a little leeway there, and feel free to add any corrections if you do have any. Just a disclaimer before I sign off here, since I know I'm going to get comments about it, is that although in the video I may not sound like it, I'm actually quite fond of the old attuning, in certain ways at least. Yes, it was very involved and long, but to me, that's what makes MMOs special. For me, it's fun to have really complex stuff like this. It gives you something to work towards other than your eye level. And overall, I find it fun to reminisce and think back to it, and that's the whole point of my Time Warp series in fact. So, whether you look upon attuning favorably or not, I hope you at least had fun watching the video. I mean, you made it this far, so hopefully that's the case. But that pretty much concludes my coverage of the BC attunement. I'm gonna take some ibuprofen and lay down. I hope you found this video interesting or entertaining. Like it if you liked it, and thanks for watching. Peace.